All right, as I mentioned earlier, the Texas Tribune would not be what it is without its sponsors, and we could not do this event without its sponsors, many of whom are in this room, and we thank you. A quick list that will last until next week. Our presenting sponsor for the symposium is the Texas Rural Funders. Our major sponsors are Methodist Healthcare Ministries, Texas Association of Dairymen, Texas Agricultural Council, the Commit Partnership, Water Grows, Lone Star Economic Alliance, Raise Your Hand Texas, Texas State Technical College, Texas A&M Health's Rural Engagement Program, Texas Cattle Feeders Association, and PepsiCo. Our supporting sponsors are the Texas Agricultural Cooperative Council, Texas Forestry Association, Texas Poultry Federation, Texas Citrus Mutual, Texas Pecan Growers Association, Capital Farm Credit, Texas Corn Producers, Texas Nursery and Landscape Association, 1953 Tequila, Beer Alliance of Texas, Will and Chris Vineyards, Texas Association of Mid-Sized Schools, Texas Pork Producers Association, Texas Farm Bureau, the University of Texas Press, Texas Agricultural Land Trust, UTSA's College for Health, Community, and Policy, Petit Paloma, again, those boots, membership, don't forget about that, and Texas Southwest SBDC Network. We would also like to thank our sponsors, again, Texas Public Radio, Texas Standard, Fredericksburg Standard Radio Post, and the Texas County Reporter. Through corporate sponsors and donors, though corporate sponsors and donors underwrite these events, they play no role in determining the content, speakers, or lines of questioning. All right, let's get going with our first panel. That's their cue. Oh, here they come. Okay. Farm to table agriculture, as we just heard, agriculture is the historic backbone of this state. It has been one of the most reliable economic drivers of the state. However, the industry has been upended by climate instability, technological changes, and a shift toward urbanization in the state. How is the state's ag industry moving forward in the 21st century? We will hear about that next. Our speakers include David Gibson, who is the Executive Director of the Texas Corn Producers and immediate past chair of the Texas Ag Council. The Texas Corn Producers works to grow opportunities for Texas corn farmers through promotion, education, research, and legislative advocacy. Gibson provides strategic guidance over TCP's efforts and works closely with legislators and officials to ensure farmers' interests are heard. We have Diana Padilla, who is the co-owner of Yahweh All Natural Farm and Garden. For more than 10 years, Yahweh has been planting, growing, and harvesting fruits and vegetables in the Rio Grande Valley and providing the local community with fruits and vegetables in their farmers markets and through the use of the community-supported agricultural boxes. We have Lillian Solrano, who is the current acting deputy undersecretary for rural development at the USDA. Prior to this appointment, she served as the RD state director in Texas, where she oversaw multiple loans and grant programs designed to increase opportunities for rural Texas. Then we have David Vollman, who is a partner at Vollman's Dairy Farm in Gustine. His family moved to Gustine from Luxembourg in 1993 for the American dream and has been dairy farming in the same location ever since. Together with his family, they now grow crops, milk cows, and bottle milk in returnable glass bottles under the Vollman's Family Farm brand, which is sold throughout almost the entire state. And our moderator is Berenice Garcia, who is our Rio Grande Valley reporter for the Texas Tribune. She works at the Tribune through a partnership with Report for America. She previously covered local government, crime, healthcare, and other assignments for The Monitor in McAllen, where she was born. Please welcome everybody, and let's have a great conversation.
Thank you. So, we're here to talk about agriculture. Texas leads the nation in the number of farms and ranches with 230,662, covering 125.5 million acres, and this is according to the Texas Department of Agriculture. However, the state of Texas is losing about 1,000 acres of farmland each day, according to Texas A&M Natural Resources Institute. And as we just heard Commissioner Sid Miller say, he's estimated it's more about one farm a day. He doesn't seem to think it's quite in jeopardy at the moment, but it's still quite a shift from where it was decades ago. So that brings me to my first question, which I'm directing to Mr. Gibson here. And that is, you've been in the agriculture industry for decades, and I wanted to ask you what have been the biggest changes that you've seen throughout your time, and how would you describe the current state of agriculture?
Well, it's a pleasure to be here on behalf of our corn farmers, and also from my role as working with Ag Council here in Texas, which boasts about 75 groups. So I'm not necessarily representing all of them, but the people I represent as corn farmers are members and parts of a whole bunch of those. So it's good to be here. As you said, I've been around decades, and I have to admit I am getting a little bit older. I can remember I started my work in Texas in 1974 in Hale County with Extension Service. We watched, at that time, since then, we've seen insect problems change the crop mix, especially in that area. We've seen the increase in irrigated acres. We've seen a decrease now in irrigated acres. We're seeing a decrease in the groundwater in that part of the state. Now working on a statewide basis, I've watched for 25 years issues with water coming down the Rio Grande, and now it's put the sugar mill out of business, not having the water. I think one of the key things over all of that time has been water. Some of the other things that's really impacted agriculture in that time, a lot of our farmers now are the generation just behind those of us that went through the 80s when we saw a lot of what we're seeing now, extremely high interest rates, input costs far outracing commodity prices, and a farm crisis with a lot of our farmers economically. And we're seeing that again today, or I'm hearing that from my farmers I represent. So, it's kind of been a full cycle. We've had some really good years in the middle, but when we look now, water is one of our key issues. We're having a hard time finding labor. I think everyone up here will talk about a labor issue. We used to have the premier farm-to-market system on our highways out in our ag areas. Most of those roads are getting worn out, and we're building roads for all the urban growth, and we're not really fixing back up to move all our ag commodities in the manner we used to. We are dealing in a new world with having to operate with needing broadband. When David goes out to plant his corn, he's probably turning on a switch to operate off of broadband to help operate every piece of that equipment. And we're short in the country. So, we didn't used to have that. Now that's become some of the problem. So it's, farmers are eternal optimists. They have to be. Many of our guys every year have $1 million or multi-million-dollar operations. And these margins and some of these challenges now are really presenting an issue to them. So I'm kind of talking on the large scale. I know Diana will talk some more from some smaller scale issues, but they really, I think we all mirror the same problem.
Yeah, absolutely. And so, Mr. Vollman, I wanted to ask you, similarly, I'm curious to know, what it's like to be a dairy farmer today.
Yeah, so we started many years ago in '93, and we started then at a smaller farm, and this farm has grown in size, and like you mentioned, or like you mentioned earlier today, we do bottle some of our milk in glass bottles, so we have evolved with time. And I think, if I think of some of the challenges that need to go with that is kind of the underlying point, I would say, is infrastructure. So I think of water first and foremost. Water's a limiting factor. We are blessed here in the state of Texas that we get plenty of sunshine and heat units, so we can grow a lot of things. We just have to have the water. And I can clearly remember just several years ago, all our farmland was all flooded by the river because it had rained so much that year. And it was just a short year or two later that the lake was so dry, there was no water to irrigate the crops. And to me, that just seems silly that that water is wasted one year and then another year, then we're short on water. So the other great points that Mr. Gibson made, for example, is our roads. Our roads in rural, they have to keep up with as everything kind of has grown and as the equipment that needs to go with these roads, they just need to keep up with what we're doing on them in farming and appreciating the fact that these are farm-to-market roads and that the farmers should be allowed to drive down these roads, as opposed to, at times, it seems like we're looked down upon because we're taking a tractor and driving slow down these roads. And then broadband definitely comes to mind. Where our farm is, we don't have very good cell phone service. I cannot have a conversation on the phone at most places on the farm. I have to specifically know where I need to go for that. And the same when it comes to internet, we don't have fiber internet. We're kind of blessed to have some satellite internet lately that's better. But those kind of infrastructure in general is where I would say could be some great improvements to help dairy farmers or rural people.
Yeah, so just kind of jumping off the one of the main concerns you mentioned being water. I've been reporting a lot of how the Rio Grande Valley specifically has been challenged in terms of water, but I'm curious as to other parts of the state where you are, what are the solutions that you all are looking at? What are you trying to get funded in terms of fixing those water scarcity issues? And anyone who can.
Are you talking about the water systems? Yeah, so,
Yeah.
I mean, well, we have federal funds that we have a lot of in small towns all over Texas. Most of those water systems were built by the federal government over, like 60 years ago. And most of them need repairs. And so we have just lots of challenges making sure that these are, folks have the technical capacity to know what comes next. A lot of these folks, the person that's running the city, I always call these people Betty, right? There's a city secretary or something that's running some of these small towns in small town Texas, that she's also the part-time bus driver, and she's sort of the assistant city manager, because there's not a lot of paid staff in these small towns. And to do water systems, it's just, we can't expect these small towns to do water systems on their own. So between the federal government, USDA funds, literally billions of dollars in water systems around the country and in Texas, then the state of Texas, of course. There's actually a water meeting once a month in Texas where all the partners get on and talk about who's in the worst trouble, how we can do. But it'd be really great if we had more. We need more funds to do it, even though the legislature, we have money now for the first time, but it's going to cost a lot more than that.
Yeah, so another thing I wanted to talk about, not just in Texas, right? We have the Farm Bill, right, that expired this year, and I'm curious as to how the USDA can continue to help Texan farmers in light of the situation.
Well, the Farm Bill, they've been arguing about it for a long time. The USDA and the people like me that are in the federal government, we just are like their technical assistance providers. It's Congress, right? So they're gonna most likely get an extension because they can't finish it by the end of the year. There's a lot of work to do, but there's a lot of, commonalities, some of the folks we have in Texas and around the country, regardless of your party affiliation, they try to work through it. They always have trouble because there's extremes on both sides that we can't seem to, 98% we're agreeing on, but we're throwing it down the hill because of 2%, right? And so that's part of our challenge, but we feel like the Farm Bill it's in very good shape to get passed. They probably can't do it by the end of the year, so they'll get an extension. But a lot of people think that we have a shot of getting it done in the first 6 months.
I guess from our perspective, some of our current problems, even though we need the Farm Bill passed, aren't going to be fixed by passing the Farm Bill today. We've had high interest rates. We've had one of the worst dry spells all across our state that we've had. Some areas in Rio Grande had the water shut off. A lot of our aquifers have been pulled down, even those that recharge. I know I was visiting a grower here in the Edwards Aquifer area talking about how low the aquifer is. So that's put some tremendous pressure on many of our farmers. And I know in my visiting around, there's a bill in DC, kind of a marker bill that's out there that for some economic assistance and disaster assistance. It's going to be important for us to see that because passing a farm bill only moves funding. If they pass it in 25, the funding out of that farm bill don't reach most of our farms till 26. So we've got this serious economic issue going on that I mentioned, kind of like in the 80s when we saw a lot of farms liquidated and sold out. And we've got to have some type of fix to keep our people on the land. It's kind of like was mentioned last night, without our farmers in the rural area, we don't have food and fiber. You know, I think Chairman Darby mentioned there's cotton's not grown behind Dillard's, and the HEB don't have a cow behind the store where the beef comes from, and the milk don't come from behind the store. It's got to all be produced, and we've got to have those farmers in business. Kind of to some of the previous question, you know, many of our producers have used a lot of USDA dollars through the Natural Resources Conservation Service to implement practices on their farms to reduce the amount of water being applied, to cut back on waste, but it still takes water to produce the crops. Whether Diana has a small farm, she's got to have water to operate it, and my grower that may farm 5,000 acres, he's got to have water, rainfall or groundwater, some type of water to grow those crops. So we've utilized those programs. As you mentioned, the Water Development Board has programs that's helped through some of the political subdivisions to go out and improve systems. But at the end of the day, we've got to have sources of the water to use all of those tools. And we're actually seeing some of those programs helping us take some irrigated acres back to dryland acres to do it. It's a challenge depending on land debt and equipment debt and farm operation to go from one level of income back to a different level. But with some of the help, we've got some of those programs, but we really need them enhanced, and we've got a big educational issue to make sure producers and at all levels know how to use those programs, and that we have a good understanding with the agencies as to what we need and how it could be applied and used.
So I want to turn to Diana real quick, because Diana, I know, along with your organization, Yahweh All Natural Farms, you also have a nonprofit named Hope. And through your organization, you work with people who want to get into farming. And so can you talk about the challenges that are facing people who want or are interested in doing that?
This is my first time on this kind of a panel, so I'm kind of nervous, but I want you to know I thank you for giving me this opportunity, because I feel I have a lot to say. I am a farmer. I am a farmer that helps farmers get into farming or better their farming. Hope is holistic, organic, practical education. And one of the things that I've seen from yesterday and today is that there has to be more education. People are forgetting that food is coming from the rural communities. And all the money can't go to the urban, but there's people in the urban that want to do it as well, and then they don't get funded either. So food is important, and we really need to focus on food. And I'm losing track, because I want to answer so many questions. Water is a big issue. Land is a big issue. It's becoming too expensive. The big farmers, they don't want to farm anymore. corporates coming in, buying these lands, subdividing them for houses, and now, if you want to get into agriculture, you can't afford it anyways. Equipment's too expensive, and you wouldn't buy a $500,000 machine to run 20 acres. So there's a disconnect between policy, between people who want to get in the industry, between people who are leaving the industry, between people who forget where this food comes from. And we have to do more of these talks and bring people together and say, we have solutions. So USDA funded us a grant that was the only one funded to an organization in Texas called Increasing Land Access. And I'm considering that a pilot project, a project that can show that some of these things that we're gonna do can solve, bring people from the city back to rural, to farm, divide it up, share equipment, share supplies. We're gonna need a lot of help, but I think we can, see if that would work, because I don't see people farming 1,000 acres anymore. I don't. I see people farming 50, 20, 5, aggregating their supplies and then serving the communities. And maybe not exporting everything we grow. Maybe exporting it to the neighbor's county or community and thinking about us feeding us instead of us feeding everybody. So I hope with our organization that we help grow more. We have grown with that grant. We have grown from the Rio Grande Valley to now more regional. We are going to be in Kaufman, in Waco, in Mission, Donna, Santa Rosa, and Harlingen. So that gives people opportunity who want to learn and get into farming, more chances to do it. But I want to be available to many people so that we can solve it little at a time. But we're going to need the people from yesterday on the policies and the people here together and the reporters to kind of try to do this more often.
I just wanted to add one point you made that I thought was so important is just the disconnect between farming and just the general public. One thing that USDA's done in the last just 2 years, I guess, is we've put together, or we've instituted what we call urban agricultural centers. And there's going to be one here in San Antonio, there's one in Dallas, one in Harris County, I think is opening, in Houston area is opening first of the year. And basically, it was a way, we didn't think, someone in downtown Dallas is going to come to our urban ag center and then all of a sudden, turn their studio apartment into supplying tomatoes for HEB. That wasn't the thinking. The thinking was, get everybody on the same page where their food comes from. It's just this huge vacuum that we have where if the urban doesn't care about rural, rural's going to go away. I mean, we have to get urban folks worried about the same. It can't just be us worried about the rural state of Texas or really across the country. We have got to have a lot of advocates. And what we know because of the population, we can't just have the members from West Texas care about the Farm Bill. We got to have, or a disaster relief or water. We have to have all of us. And so these urban ag centers, one of the things they're doing is they're making it so that people get to know. I mean, we're going to have rooftop farmers and that kind of stuff, but a lot of it is the education. So we don't have so much, divide on rural and urban if we all take a stake, because you're so right. People are just so disconnected from where their food comes from.
Yeah, and so I'm curious then, is there initiatives that that are possible at the county level or even at the state level to incentivize people to invest in farmland and to keep that industry alive in that sense?
Well, I mean, we have beginning farmer grants for, like veterans, for example. That's the other thing that I think a lot of Americans don't realize is how much disproportionate, the amount of, if we're looking at, we have a huge shortage of people that are joining the military. When they do join, 40% of them come out of rural America, right? And so when we don't support rural America, we also make it so we have weakened security. We've got to keep these places vibrant. We have the grant that she's talking about, we have nationwide, but there's also through cooperatives, right? So we have a huge cooperative model within the United States government that, works for farmers, right? Where they can, everybody's got a shared interest. And we support cooperatives, farmer cooperatives, if they will take up, a joint purchase of land. We have monies for that.
Diana, I saw you shaking your head earlier. Did you disagree a little bit, or do you feel like it's not enough?
Yes and no. We do have programs, and the federal government is putting out a lot of money, but the local communities are not addressing the agriculture as an important item. So my challenge is getting the community, because I live in a 70,000 population city. By the way, I'm from Chicago. That to me was rural. So when I moved here, I thought I was moving to a farm, and I was actually moving to the city. But the city people don't respect agriculture. So I don't care how much money you have up here, if the local community doesn't respect the agriculture, it still has a problem. You go to the workforce and they have money for training, and you talk to them about training somebody in agriculture, and they say they don't make enough money. We still need to train the people in agriculture. We still need to feed our communities. And farmers can't be responsible for hiring people and firing people because they don't like it and they can't afford to do it. And the workforce says it's not something we want to train in. So there is a disconnect. I mean, agriculture, maybe in the federal government, they understand we need to grow the farmer, but that has to happen in the counties, in the cities, and the local communities, and I don't see that happening.
Mr. Gibson and Mr. Volman, I wanted to ask you, there's been talk of workforce issues, and I'm curious, those are problems that you're experiencing as well, and what are the challenges when it comes to finding that workforce for agriculture?
Sorry, I didn't understand.
Yeah, so I'm just curious about problems with workforce, finding people to work in agriculture.
I think David can probably really speak to that from their industry. That's one of the biggest workforce requiring industries, David.
Yeah, so as a dairy farmer, especially in rural, I think the things that I think about is kind of comes back to the same theme that we've been talking about. When people they're in rural, they want opportunities. A lot of times, rural incomes are at a lower level, and so people want to maybe move to the city, and for the amenities as well, for things like the broadband and such. We have people that come work and they're like, well, I can't even be on my phone. I can't have a conversation. Things like that. They're frustrating. People have come to develop this way of life, and then especially with the inflation lately and the housing such. So like in our small towns, trying to buy a house, the property taxes on those things that really hinders people trying to move to our small towns. And so it's kind of an interesting dilemma between the housing is just not there. There's maybe not high enough or nice enough houses for the people that want the upper level positions or such, and then other people just not being able to find it or such. So I think we just have some, again, infrastructure things that can be improved in our small towns that will make them more conducive to our labor force.
One thing I'd add into what he said, and it's all exactly true, but we even have issues within the USDA programs having employees in our local FSA offices, in our CS offices. I'll use Dalhart, Texas, for an example. It's really a booming community with the dairy industry and the feedlots, but getting people to move there and work and live there is a challenge. And, You know, it's a lot more fun to live in San Antonio, Texas, where you've got entertainment up and down, or activities to go to up and down every street, than to be, you know, an hour's drive or 2 or 3 hours drive into maybe a movie theater, or in a lot of cases we have a struggle with rural doctors, with rural hospitals. Some of our school systems are struggling out in the rural areas. You know, so to move a family and live there is a challenge, and that intensifies part of our workforce problem. And I pick on Dalhart, Texas. Well, I think I know, talking to Rob Hughes with the Forestry Association, they run into some things in East Texas the same way, with those communities that are more isolated, and just to get those workers there, and to have workers that are willing to do what David needs done, what a packing plant needs done, what a cheese plant needs done. That's the industry out in a lot of rural Texas, and people willing to do that work. It's hard work. It's rewarding work, but it's hard. And so you throw all that together, that's a big challenge for our workforce. And I can relate. I was in a South Texas Country Elevator meeting, and the elevators and gyms down there were talking about shortage of labor, and how used to they had enough migrant laborers that could come and work and fill their needs. Now they're doing H-2A workers from somewhere else, some other country, to bring them in and do that work. A lot of our other bigger industries in the High Plains use that, just because we can't get the people that are willing to do those jobs.
Yeah, so we've been talking about the needs, especially when it comes to infrastructure. Curious as to, well, so we're on the eve of the Texas legislature, right? They're going to be in session just a couple of months. So I wanted to know, what are you all hoping to see get done this session in the short term?
So I wanted to kind of come back to what I was saying earlier, and I, you know, in agriculture and as a dairy farmer, my grandparents were dairy farmers, my parents were dairy farmers, I am, and I have kids already. And when we have our dairy and our farm, our ground, our cows, we don't just think about what's our profit going to be this year or next year. We're always thinking about how can we sustain this lifestyle for the next generation. That's our mindset. And I think that needs to be the mindset on the state level and the government as well. You know, we're here caring for a country, and I think that should be the mindset of when we do infrastructure projects, how will this be good for the next generation? How will this be good for even after those people, those lawmakers that make those decisions, when they're no longer in office? And I know that doesn't give you the instant gratification or the credit for it, but I think we need to have that mindset and that shift of, we need to think long-term. What is going to be good for Texas in the long term? And that's where I say infrastructure projects like water storage. It's again, I can't speak for all parts of the state, but in our parts of the state, there's definitely parts where water just goes down the rivers and we flood areas, and then the next year or two we're dry and we have droughts, and then we don't have enough water, and then cities get the water prior to the farms getting the water because people can't be without water. And so I think we just need to think long-term on a lot of things and have that goal.
Yeah, go ahead, Dave.
I'd like to say that policy needs to change, because a lot of urban farms are being started, and the urban policies for those farms don't match. So I'd like to see some of the policies that allow people, if they're going to do community gardens, not to pay sewer and water kind of thing. If they're going to put in a farm in the city, that they're allowed to sell in the city. A lot of policies say they can't even do that. So policies, well, urban farms are going to be good for the cities, but also the policies have to change so that those farmers are allowed to succeed.
I think some of the things that we'll be looking at, I mean, I understand where Dinah's coming from, but we're going to be concerned from our growers' side about what happens with any revisions to Chapter 36 and rules of capture for land that producers have bought over the years. We're going to be concerned about and watching what comes along those regards. We'll be watching and concerned about some labor issues and housing issues for laborers going through the session. We'll be looking, we had our council meeting yesterday. All these topics all come up amongst the ag groups, looking at some transportation issues that we've both all mentioned, talking about out in the rural areas. I know we can go up to Dumas, Texas, where there's a large dairy and a cheese plant. Last night, Chairman Darby was talking about oil field trucks up there. It's truckloads of milk moving, and we need better infrastructure for that. The broadband, we've got so many areas, just like David mentioned, when we travel the state and go to people's farms, it still is not being serviced, and there's been a lot of federal dollars dedicated to it, not a lot seen on the ground yet, some state dollars and projects, but we're going to be looking at that. And then, of course, a lot of regulatory issues. Some of those are federal, but some things within state as far as dealing with wastewater and how it may be used as reclaimed water, looking at the water reclamation projects like Senator Perry's talking about. Well, all of those will be, we got to compliment our legislature for passing the Right to Farm Act, which has helped protect a lot of things about farms where urban areas have engulfed farmland and they become in the city limits and they couldn't grow their crops over 8 inches tall. And it took away their right to farm their land. We were proud that got passed. That was a big initiative, but there's still other challenges that goes with the urban rural neighborhoods where these metropolitan areas have really expanded out. My producers north of Dallas used to farm a lot of land that's all rooftops and streets now. I mentioned Diana, I remember going to the valley and seeing the big orchards and a lot of things back 25, 30 years ago, and now it's rooftops. And how hopefully there can be some way we can preserve some good farmland that we need for producing food and have it still in business.
I was talking to someone this morning on that right to farm thing, and that there's still more work to do there. Talking about how some farmers had a cornfield, and the corn wasn't even fully grown yet, and the city came in and shredded the corn. The farmer's corn on his land because they said it was, blocking view and such. And then there was also where hay bales were stacked on the corners of the properties, and they said that was attracting rodents. So they were going to fine them like $100 a day per bale, just for a farmer storing his feed on his land. And these kind of things, we need these right to farm acts, and we need to protect people that were there before that are farming and let them have their private property rights.
Lillian, did you want to add anything?
On the Texas legislature stuff, I don't have anything to add, but I do think that there's just this rural-urban divide that affects how we treat farmers, what we think about farmers, and I think the more, the closer we can get and the more opportunities we have where people understand agriculture. All of us in this room had some person in our history that was a farmer because you had to, right? Or you didn't eat. And the Secretary of Agriculture, was former governor and mayor and a good guy, he always talks about, he's, grew up an orphan and, went to law school and, just is so humbled by the fact that he doesn't have to farm, right? Farming's really hard work, but we have to have an awareness and a respect that how important it is. And I think in a place like Texas where we have so much of our heritage and our history is this sort of, huge landmass that we're all really proud of, I think we could really be an example for the rest of the country of showing that respect, because we have these, 5 large cities in Texas, and those large cities must, and I agree with you on some of the cities need to get in line with how important this is also, but we could be real leaders on sort of that respect of farmland and how we have to increase, and we have to do something to get young people involved in agriculture. We just absolutely have to, or we're in big trouble.
I want to add something. Agriculture needs to be rebranded. How is it that construction work that is so difficult, you find people that prefer to work in construction than work in agriculture? And that to me it's because it's farming, and you're doing farming. And so I think we need to rebrand and say, I'm proud to be a farmer. I feed you. I'm proud to be a farmer.
To Diana's point, I had we're looking at a job applicant a few years ago, just recently, a couple of years ago, and the young lady had helped on their farm, and her title there was production engineer. That's the way she sold herself, because she said, I do more than just farm. It's a part of being producing the product and selling. So I think you're right. Looking at something a little bit different might enhance what we do. And I thought she was pretty innovative being the production engineer.
Okay, so we've gone a little bit over time. We need to have, we have 10 minutes, I think, for questions from the audience. So if anyone has any questions, they could line up to either one of the mics that we have here. Please go ahead and do so. And if you have a question, please try to make it brief and direct, because we want to make sure that we get to as many as possible.
Thanks. So we're going to have some folks here in person for our in-person audience asking some questions, and we'll have some questions asked online. You can submit a question at texastribune.org/ask. And just a reminder, so that we can get to as many questions as possible, please frame your question with a question mark at the end and be as concise as possible. Again, out of respect for other questions, so we can get to as many as possible.
Hello, Ben Mawston here, and I was running for the state legislative branch. One of the disconnects that I hear from y'all is the lack of infrastructure. So question number one is, how much of that is a first world problem? Should there be an act of God or man that takes out that infrastructure? Second part is, and are you prepared to handle that? Okay, we become too reliant on technology. And the second part of that is, have we looked at the manpower issue and closing the gap between urban and rural by speaking with the legislative branch and including introduction in our education system wherein children would assist a farm over the summer months, for example, which are often a strain on parents that are working and their kids are no longer at school.
So the second part of that question I found intriguing, talking about essentially what I would take as an internship, and maybe not for college age, but even for younger. I think that was where that was geared, and I think that'd be wise to incentivize students to do those kind of programs. And we do have local students that help us and that work, and we have part-time students that work like at our bottling and such, and sorting bottles and such. So we already do some of that, but I think those programs should be incentivized, and especially in our schools, the ag programs need to be supported. I think that would be, that's wise to, if we could try to, funnel more effort and money, I guess, towards our ag programs.
I'd just like to add FFA, the Future Farmers of America, and the 4-H programs at the schools. The federal government helps fund those, and it's just an amazing thing to go to the Houston Rodeo and see all those rural kids there showing. I mean, if you haven't been, you should go. It's just an amazing thing to see how much work these young people have done caring for their animals and showing them, and it makes you really proud to be a Texan when you go and see that. And I think we could encourage that more. And one of the things that they started doing is they started putting livestock at some of the high schools in big cities, in Houston and Dallas, I know for sure. And that's created a sort of a link between rural and urban. So anything we can do to get more young people interested in ag, we're all better off for it.
Just to your deal about infrastructure, are we ready for some catastrophic event to cause it? Well, I think in a little while you're going to hear from an area that had a vast fire, And rebuilding that infrastructure there is so costly, it's hard. So that's a very hard question. It comes down to a lot of other policies and things. I mean, we're all ready to see better infrastructure, but it's how we can get there in a measured way that can be economical and doable without it being catastrophic to someone. So, a hard question to answer.
I'm gonna add just real quick. Cooperative and hubs are the answer to the infrastructure, I think. Getting a nonprofit like we are and buying, getting the equipment and supplies that they can use for share, and that way each farmer doesn't have to buy it, is the way I think we would address it.
Okay, next question.
Hi, so as an aspiring farmer, I can definitely speak to the disconnect. I read about and I research all different sorts of grants and assistance and things that are supposed to be out there, but at the end of the day, it is extremely difficult for any of that to actually reach the small starter farms that are actually looking to do the organic. And with that being said, we have a brand new administration that is coming in, and a lot of us are very excited about what Bobby Kennedy is bringing forward. And I just wanted to know if you guys, what changes in funding and approach that you might see coming down with soil regeneration and supporting this healthy soil all the way up for our children and our future.
Well, I'll make a quick stab at that. I'll just say, you know, we're looking forward to the new administration and what it brings. We've already, across all of agriculture, we've been actively moving into this sustainability world. Sometimes that's a hard word to define. I mean, your sustainability may be different than the gentleman over here, but that's part of what our producers are looking at, that because there's some cost savings in it. There's things to be more economical in doing some of those practices. So if we get an enhancement behind that to help push it at a more rapid pace, I think it'll help. As far as your question about the grants back for small farmers, you know, I know there's a lot of programs, and it is a challenge to get through the red tape. I've talked with a lot of folks that worked on that, and that's something I'm sure is going to be addressed in a different way, probably in this administration than the last administration. So we'll see where that all goes. There was a lot of folks yesterday with groups here in Texas that had a lot of comments on those things. I think some of them would be good to follow up with if you haven't already.
I just got to say, this administration has put more money into Texas than any other administration for agriculture. And so I'm really proud that I got to work for this administration where we put over $16 billion into Texas agriculture on 78,000 different projects. We've done more for climate smart agriculture. We've done more for water. And so I'm just telling you, my time's lapsing with this administration, and I'm not so happy about the next administration. So there you go. But good luck to you.
I'll copy that.
Thank you for your question.
Yeah, just want to ask one question from online, then we'll go to the gentleman over here. Charlie from Spring asks, what effect will the Trump administration's mass deportation have on agriculture in Texas?
Well, I mean, if you're, it's going to be, I believe there was somebody that worked for the Department of Homeland Security was on, I don't know, some podcast, but spoke about it just in a very, detached way. Wasn't a pro-Democrat, wasn't a pro-Republican, but just talked about that. And I can't remember the name, or I tell you, but it was just, there's going to be a chilling effect if that happens. And a lot of us that have, brown people in our families, myself included. I have two Hispanic daughters. If they're going into schools and factories and other places in agricultural and picking up folks, a lot of us are worried about how that will affect our families. And so I believe that agriculture will be affected for sure.
I'm an I experienced that. I experienced that when I was young. They had one of those, pick up everybody and then find out who they are. It's not fun. It stayed in my mind forever, and I don't think it's right. So I hope they don't do that, because it was not nice.
Anyone else want to chime in on that?
I think the thing we'll have to be really aware of is that for our producers and our industries, that we have followed the law and done what we're supposed to do with our workers. And if you've got a place that didn't do that, then I think there's going to be some serious issues with laborers. But as I mentioned earlier, we've already got many of our businesses, our farms, our end users, whoever, that's already going through other legal ways to bring in workers, because we've not been able to get a lot of workers out of that group. So that's a hard one to answer until we see how that works.
I think the answer needs to be also more legal immigration, or, enticing people to work on farms, and then there is some visa programs for that, but I don't think they need to be as cumbersome as they are. They need to allow people with educated college degrees, for example, in animal science, to be able to work on our farms and not be just a very burdensome process to have that happen. And there's already some of that out there, so.
Next question.
So my name's Andy Holloway. I'm the county extension agent for Texas A&M AgriLife Extension in Hemphill County up in the Texas Panhandle, Canadian Texas. So there's several things I want to say that I want to thank this panel for their expertise and their thoughtfulness in a big way, from a little producer all the way up to ranchers and farmers that farm tens of thousands of acres and provide food and fiber for the world. One of the things that I think has failed to have been mentioned, and the reason I came up here is because of your comment about 4-H and FFAers. Our future's our kids. And if you want to connect the urban people to the farm and ranching and the way of life that's made America great over decades of time and centuries, it is to get our kids in the urban areas in 4-H and FFA. So Texans, every county in Texas has a county extension agent, and the state's paying for the extension service. So get involved with your county agent. Find out how many people even know that there is an extension service. Some people do, some people don't. And it's a resource for not only your kids, but for farmers and ranchers, for small farmers. We deal with a lot more small farmers than USDA does. And so it's so important that you get involved. That's our future. The second thing I want to talk about, that everybody's been talking about water. You guys have been talking about water. It's our number one issue. Nobody has identified the number one user of water in the state. It's not people and it's not livestock. The dairy industry uses a lot of water. Farmers use a lot of water, David. But it's cedar trees. And cedar trees are taking over Texas. And most of the state is not a native place for cedar trees. Do you realize that a cedar tree that big around uses about 10 gallons of water a day? The Texas Hill Country is going to burn up one of these days, just like Canadian Texas, where I lived, did back in February, because when fire takes a hold of cedar tree, it just explodes. And if this region, particularly right here where the Edwards Water Aquifer is, doesn't get serious about removing and controlling cedar trees, there will be no water here in the future. And so that pertains to food and fiber, and that pertains to drinking water for public residences. So if the state legislature wants to spend some of its $33 billion that's excess, one of the initiatives that we could look at that Extension has great education on is how to control some of these things. So get involved with your Extension service because we've got some big issues. And the last thing I want to say is, and I know we need to go, but one of the things that hasn't been mentioned is that some of the most productive areas of our farming and ranching land are these areas that are being urbanized. Most of West Texas, this 125 million acres, doesn't have any water. And so when I was driving into San Antonio yesterday, right out here east of town at San Marcos, used to be some of the best corn land in this region. And now it's what David Gibson says, it's houses. So there's got to be some changes in some of the thinking about that, or we're going to be in trouble in this state. So those are my comments. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, and we're out of time, but thank again to all our panelists for being here and for participating. Really appreciate it.